I don't know how many times I've stood at the edge of a cliff in my life, feeling like I could jump, but not knowing what would catch me. If you've ever had that feeling, you know exactly what I mean. The kind of overwhelming weight that makes you think the ground beneath you is going to give way. But somehow you find the courage to step forward anyway. I'm John Miller, and for the last 10 years, I've been a firefighter in the small town of Aspen Falls, Colorado. Now, Aspen Falls isn't the big, glamorous place you'd think of when you hear Colorado. It's a tucked-away little town, surrounded by rugged mountains, forests and rolling streams, a place where the air smells like pine and the kind of silence that only nature can provide. We have a population barely scratching 3,000, but when a fire breaks out, or when someone's life is on the line, everyone comes together. And that's what makes Aspen Falls so different. Ow. We're a family. But I wasn't always part of this family. I came from a town not too far from Hera, rough and tumbled place where no one had much, but they had enough. My family, well, let's just say we were more about surviving than thriving. My old man Bill worked as a mechanic in a dingy garage, cursing the world with every turn of a wrench. But he was a good man. He did what he had to do. And my mom, Carol, worked 2 jobs, one at a diner and another at a laundromat, just to make sure we had food on the table and a roof over our heads. It wasn't easy, but it was all we knew. And somehow, that became our normal. I was the oldest of 3. My little sister, Emily, was always the sunshine in our family. She had this laugh that could make the darkest days feel a little brighter. My brother, Tyler, though he was a different story. Tyler was a constant reminder that things weren't always as easy as we wished them to be. He was always in trouble, the kind of trouble you couldn't ignore. He got into drugs, got arrested more times than I could count, and each time it felt like my parents had no more room for me, their oldest son, to be anything other than a shadow in the background, forgotten as they focused all their energy on saving Tyler. It wasn't easy growing up like that. I spent my days at school trying to focus. But my mind was always at home wondering if my parents were going to argue about Tyler again, or if the cops were going to show up and ruin what little peace we had. Every night I tried to sneak away to work at a local bar washing dishes, anything to escape the house for just a few hours. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Things changed, though, when I turned 19. I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I joined the fire department not because I thought I'd be some kind of hero, but because it was the only thing that made sense. I wanted a purpose. I wanted to save lives. And no one else in my family could see that, but I was determined to show them that I wasn't just another lost cause. That's when I moved to Aspen Falls. I remember my first day at the firehouse like it was yesterday. The smell of coffee and engine grease filled the air, and there was an energy there, an energy I'd never felt before. It was a brotherhood, pure and simple. There was Captain Mike, a man who could have been my father, tough but fair, with a heart bigger than the mountains we worked in. Then there was Nei Chung, eager and fearless. He always reminded me of the way I was back when I first started, full of hope and the belief that everything was possible. But the moment that really changed things for me, it came one cold afternoon, after a long shift, when I decided to stop by the little cafe in town. I'd seen her there before, sitting by the window, reading her book, as though the world outside didn't exist. Her name was Lilia, name that suited her perfectly, soft but unforgettable. Her smile, when she looked up and saw me standing there, made everything around me disappear. It was like she had a light that could guide me through all the dark corners of my mind. I wasn't looking for love hell. I wasn't even sure I knew what love was anymore, but when I saw her, I felt something stirring in my chest. It felt like the world had finally given me a reason to keep pushing forward. Lily wasn't like the other people I'd known. She didn't look at me with pity or expectation. She didn't care about my past, about the man I used to be. She just saw me. Dot 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 But life has a funny way of throwing things at you when you least expect it. 6 months into my new life in Aspen Falls, we got a call. Fire broke out in the high school. I knew this town like the back of my hand, and I knew that building better than any other place. I felt something deep in my gut when I heard the call over the radio. I grabbed my jacket, slammed it on, and jumped into the truck with my crew. The sirens wailed as we raced through the streets, red lights flashing through the darkening sky. I remember hearing the dispatcher's voice tremble for the first time as she called in the details. A fire in the chemistry lab. The whole school was on fire. There were kids trapped inside. We arrived in a haze of smoke and chaos. The school was alive with flames, windows shattering from the heat. Parents gathered in the street, eyes wild with panic, searching for their kids. Inside, screams echoed. I couldn't see much through the smoke, but I could hear them voices calling out, desperate for help. I knew, in that moment, that everything I had learned in this job had been leading to this. This was the moment that would test me, break me, and make me. I took a deep breath and plunged into the smoke, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't about saving my own life anymore. It was about getting those kids out. Remember the first student I found? She was coughing, lying on the floor of the hallway. I picked her up, carried her out the door, and handed her to Nate, who was waiting at the edge. That's when I heard the shout. John, the library, someone's trapped in there. The library where the smoke was thickest, where the fire was raging out of control. I rushed to the door, my breath shallow and my heart racing. I didn't know who was inside, but I knew I had to get them out. The door was locked, but I could hear faint cries from the other side. I kicked it open with all the strength I had left. It's inside. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see past my hand. But then I saw her. She was lying on the floor pail, her lips a color I never wanted to see again. I grabbed her, my arms shaking as I lifted her up. She was light, too light, but every step I took felt like carrying a mountain on my back. That's when the bookshelf came crashing down. I didn't know what hit me at first. All I knew was that the pain was immediate, sharp, and overwhelming. I collapsed, my head spinning, vision blurring, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let go. "Stay with me," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. The girl, unconscious, was limp in my arms. I shoved through the wreckage, pushing past flames, the heat almost unbearable. I had to make it to the window. With one last push, I made it to the window, where Nate had set up the ladder. I handed the girl off, my heart in my throat. As the flames licked at my back, I felt the world slip away. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground, surrounded by the quiet hum of an ambulance. My body was on fire from the pain, but my mind was racing. Had I done enough? Was she okay? It wasn't until later that I found out the girl's name. Her name was Emma, and she was alive. The relief that flooded my chest was unlike anything I'd ever known. But then came the unexpected part, the part that changed everything. You see, when I woke up in the hospital, still groggy from the sedatives, I wasn't just greeted by the familiar faces of my fellow firefighters. I was greeted by the Harrington family, Emma's parents. They were there, standing at my bedside, grateful for what I'd done.
"John,"
Mr. Harrington said, his voice full of respect. "You saved our daughter. We'll never be able to repay you for that. But we want to try." And that's when everything changed. The Harringtons were rich. I mean, real rich. Their family owned most of the land around Aspen Falls, the kind of wealth I'd never dreamed of. And that's when the envelope came. A check for $5 million. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis. My whole life was different now. But what do you do when life hands you that kind of gift? Do you keep it? Do you change? I had no idea. And that's where you come in. What would you do if you were me? Would you accept that kind of money? Would you take the opportunity to change everything in your life? Or would you stay true to the person you are? I need to know. What would you do? Let me know in the comments. The days that followed felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and decisions that I wasn't ready to face. After the fire, after the pain of my injury started to subside, I felt the weight of that check in my piccata, weight that seemed to grow heavier by the minute. It wasn't just the amount of money. It was what it represented. It represented change, kind of change I wasn't sure I wanted, or deserved, or even knew how to handle. It's funny, you know? You spend your whole life struggling to get ahead, thinking that if you had a little more money, things would be easier, better. But when it's handed to you on a silver platter, you realize that money isn't the answer to everything. In fact, it might only complicate things more than they already are. But that check sitting there in my wallet, growing cold in its pristine envelope, had a different kind of power. A power I had never experienced before. The first time I truly thought about it was on a Sunday morning, just a few days after I left the hospital. The sun was barely rising over the mountains, and the air in Aspen Falls was crisp and clear, one of those mornings that made you feel like you could breathe again, like the world wasn't so heavy. Grandma Elsa, Mom's mom, had always told me that mornings like this were a sign that life was giving you a second chance. But what was I supposed to do with mine? I had been avoiding everyone, my family, the firehouse, even Lily. I didn't know how to face them. What would they think? I wasn't the guy who got rewarded for doing the right thing. Hell, I wasn't even sure I deserved it. But there I was, sitting on the porch of my small cabin, staring out over the valley, holding this check that could change everything. I wasn't ready to make any decisions, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stay in this place, in this world of uncertainty, forever. I had to go somewhere, do something. I slid the check back into the envelope and tossed it into my desk drawer. For now, it could wait. It was then that Lily texted me, her message simple, but it hit me hard. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Hope you're doing okay. Let me know when you feel up for some coffee." I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. There was so much I hadn't told her, so much I hadn't been able to share. The fire, the girl I saved, the money. Hell, I hadn't even told her about my own struggles. And then there was my family, the ones who'd never come around. How could I open up to her when I couldn't even open up to myself? But maybe that was the point. Maybe Lily was the one person who wouldn't judge me, who would just listen. I grabbed my jacket and shoved my phone in my pocket. The thought of spending another minute alone in my cabin felt suffocating. I needed to breathe. The walk to the cafe wasn't far, just a few blocks. The town of Aspen Falls wasn't big, but it had everything I needed. It was always quiet, always calm, just the way I liked it. As I approached the cafe, I spotted Lily sitting at a corner table, her blonde hair falling around her shoulders, a coffee cup in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her face lighting up with that smile of hers. The one that always made me feel like maybe everything was going to be okay. "Hey, John," she said softly, her voice gentle but warm. "I was starting to think you weren't going to show up." I slid into the seat across from her, giving her a small, awkward smile. "Sorry, just trying to get my head straight." She raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing that something was off, but didn't push me. Instead, she just nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "I get it. I've been feeling a little out of sorts myself lately. Everything's changing so fast, you know?" I nodded in agreement. It felt like the world was spinning too fast, like the life I'd known was slipping through my fingers. "I can't imagine what you've been going through, John," she continued, her voice full of understanding. "I know you saved that girl, Emma, and you've been through hell with the fire and everything, but how are you really doing?" I hesitated, not sure how to answer. How could I explain to her that my body was healing, but my heart was still a mess? How could I tell her that I wasn't sure who I was anymore, not without feeling like a fraud? "I don't know," I finally said, running a hand through my hair. "I guess I thought I'd feel better, you know? I thought things would be easier after the fire, after the whole town started calling me a hero, but all I feel is confused. It's like everything's shifting and I can't find my footing." Lily reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now, John. You're allowed to be confused. But one thing's for sure, you saved that girl's life. That's something no one can take away from you." The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about the recognition. It wasn't about being some hero or being praised for saving someone. It was about the fact that I had done something good, something that mattered. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the guy who was overlooked, who lived in the shadows of his family's dysfunction. It's John Miller, the guy who saved someone's life. Lily squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens next, whatever you decide, I just want you to know that I'm here for you. I'll be proud of you no matter what." I felt a lump form in my throat. I didn't deserve her kindness, but I was thankful for it. For the first time in so long, I felt like I didn't have to carry the world on my shoulders alone. As we finished our coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something big. But I didn't know what. Later that afternoon, I got another call. It was from Emma's father, Mr. Harrington. His voice was calm but firm when he spoke. "John, I know this is a lot to ask, but I'd like to meet with you. It's about the donation we discussed, the money we'd like to give you." I froze. The thought of the check, the weight of it in my pocket, hit me all over again. But this time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept it. Was I truly deserving? Or was I just someone who had been lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time? I agreed to meet Mr. Harrington, but deep down, I knew I wasn't ready for whatever he had planned. When I walked into his office the next day, the air was thick with the kind of power that money could buy. The walls were lined with expensive art, and the view from the windows was nothing short of breathtaking. It was a far cry from the small, simple life I'd known. Mr. Harrington stood up as I entered, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "John, I want to thank you again, but I also want to talk about something else, something more." I sat down, my heart beating fast. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. He slid a thick envelope across the desk, and for the first time I felt the weight of the decision. "Take some time," he said. "But when you're ready, we can discuss how this money can change your life. You've earned it." As I left his office, I held the envelope in my hand, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. The path ahead was murky, but one thing was clear. The decisions I made from this point forward would shape my future. But what kind of future would it be? The world felt like it was closing in on me. Every step I took seemed to get heavier, as if the burden of this newfound wealth was beginning to suffocate me. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about purpose. I had to figure out what my purpose really was before it was too late. So here's the question I'm asking you. What would you do if you had the chance to change your life completely? Yeah? To have everything you ever dreamed of, but at the cost of losing who you are. Would you take it, or would you let it go? Let me know what you think. What would you do? I don't know when I became so afraid of change. Maybe it was all those years of watching my life unfold in the same pattern, barely scraping by. Only to find out that the moment something good happened, it slipped right through my fingers. That's what I was afraid of, you know? That I'd take this huge opportunity, this massive gift from the Harringtons, and somehow ruin it true in everything that mattered. I didn't tell Lily about the check. I didn't tell anyone. I was keeping it to myself, afraid to admit how much I was struggling with the idea of taking it. The thought of it haunted me as I drove home that evening, the envelope resting in the passenger seat of my truck like a ticking time bomb. I glanced at it between the long stretches of empty road, feeling a knot twist tighter in my stomach with every mile. When I got back to my cabin, the evening sky was fading to purple, the last rays of sunlight hitting the mountains in the distance. I walked into my living room, my heart thumping in my chest, and sat down on the couch. My eyes landed on the desk drawer where the check sat. My mind was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that every choice I made now would determine my future. I ran my hands over my face, trying to clear the fog. The fire, the girl, the family who didn't care, the money that was sitting there, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering the last few months, everything that had led up to this point. The night of the fire, the way everything seemed to move in slow motion as I pulled Emma out of the smoke. Her face, pale and gasping for air, her life hanging by a thread. I couldn't think about her without feeling a swell of guilt, not because I saved her, but because I knew I hadn't saved anyone else. The fire, the chaos, it still felt like it was all on me. And then there was Grandma Elsie. She'd always told me to be careful with my heart, to protect it, to not let anyone take advantage of it. But how could I not be open to the Harringtons? They had been nothing but kind, generous. They saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself in years. They didn't care about my past, about the mess I came from. They cared about what I had done. That was the problem. Maybe they saw me as a hero, but I didn't. I didn't see what they were seeing. And still, the check sat there, waiting for me. The decision was too big, too life-altering. I had no idea what I would be like if I accepted it. I thought about calling Mr. Harrington, about asking for time to think. But then the voice of my mother popped into my mind, her cold, distant voice accusing me of being reckless. And I couldn't do that to myself again. Couldn't let her or anyone else have that kind of control over me. I needed clarity. I needed space. The next day I went for a drive. I wasn't really sure where I was going, but I knew I needed to get away from everything: the small town, the pressure, the expectations. I drove through the winding roads outside Aspen Falls, heading into the wilderness, into the trees. The world around me was a maze of pine forests and rushing rivers, the mountains looming high above. The air smelled fresh, clean, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe without suffocating. I stopped at a quiet overlook, the sun hanging low on the horizon. The valley below stretched for miles, the golden light spilling across the fields, creating a peaceful glow. I sat on the hood of my truck, just staring at the view. My mind wandered back to my childhood, those days when I thought this kind of life was all I'd ever know. My family, my father's disappointment, my mother's lack of belief. But what hit me in that moment was how much I'd been carrying for all these years. How much I'd been letting the past control me. But the past wasn't who I was anymore. Couldn't be. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, imagining Grandma Elsie sitting next to me, telling me everything I needed to hear, the way she always did. "You're more than the mistakes you've made, John," I could hear her say. "Don't let anyone, especially your family, make you feel like you owe them. You owe yourself. Do what makes you feel alive." It hit me like a bolt of lightning. I wasn't just saving others. I wasn't just saving Emma that night. I had been saving myself all along, without even realizing it. And now, I was standing at the edge of something bigger. The future wasn't about what other people wanted from MIT. It was about what I needed to do for myself. It was time to decide. By the time I drove back into Aspen Falls, the decision was clear. I walked straight into the firehouse, the weight of the check still heavy in my pocket, but the uncertainty was gone. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with the money yet, but I knew I wasn't going to let it define me. As I stepped through the door, Nate looked up from the desk and gave me a tired grin. "You're here early," he said, standing up. "You okay?" I smiled, but this time it felt real. "Yeah, I'm good. It's better than I've been in a while." "Good to hear," he slapped me on the back. "So, what's next for you, man? You're a local hero now, huh?" I shook my head, chuckling softly. "Not a hero. Just a guy who did what anyone would have done." He raised an eyebrow. "If you say so, John. But we all know what you did. The whole town's been talking about it." I leaned against the wall, my eyes drifting to the floor. "I know, and that's the thing. I don't need anyone to talk about it. I'm just trying to figure out what comes next for me." Nate paused, his smile fading slightly. "You're not thinking about leaving, are you?" I shook my head. "No. I just need to do something that feels right." "For me," he nodded, understanding. "I get it," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, we've got your back." For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't about the fire. It wasn't about the money or the accolades. It was about finding peace in the life I had, finally feeling like I belonged in this world. But I still didn't know what I was going to do with the money. I didn't know how it was going to fit into my life, or if it even belonged there. And yet, the question still lingered. If I wasn't going to let it change who I was, then what could I do with it? What could we do with it? Could I use it to make a real difference? Would that feel more meaningful than a new truck or a fancy house? And as the days passed, I realized there was only one thing left to do. It wasn't about running away or staying the same. It was about using everything I had, my past, my present, my future, to create something bigger than me, something that mattered. But as I sat there thinking, one question echoed in my mind. What do you think? What would you do if you had the power to change someone's life with no strings attached? Would you choose to change the world or keep the wealth for yourself? Let me know what you would do. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this check, the one that had been sitting in my drawer like a silent question, wasn't about the money itself. It wasn't about the fancy cars, the designer clothes, or the luxuries that could easily come with such a sum. No, this check was a symbol of something else, the power to choose. I had the power to make a choice that could redefine my life. And as I sat there deep in thought, I realized what Grandma Elsie would say if she were here. She'd tell me that money wasn't just something to spend, it was something to invest. Not in things, but in people, in dreams, in causes that matter. If I took this gift, it had to mean something more than just a fresh start for myself. But how? I didn't want to waste it. Not after everything I'd been through. I knew that much. The next few days were a blur of reflection. I spent hours in my cabin, staring at the mountains, asking myself questions I didn't have answers to. But one thing I couldn't escape was this deep-rooted feeling that there was something more to life than just getting by. That there was a reason I was here, a purpose I still hadn't found. Was this my opportunity to make a difference? To do something that would matter not just for me, but for the people who needed it most? Then, one evening, something happened that made the decision for me. I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun dip behind the horizon, when I got a text from Lily. It was simple, like always. Just a short message asking if I was okay. I stared at the screen for a moment, before replying, "I'm okay. Just trying to figure some things out." She responded almost immediately. "I think you're doing more than just figuring things out, John. You're changing things, and that's scary. But it's also the only way forward." Her words hit me hard. Changing things. She was right. I was changing things. Every choice I made, every decision to act or stay silent was shaping the life I had ahead of me. Lily wasn't just asking how I was doing. She was encouraging me to take that step, to not be afraid of the unknown, to step into a new chapter, even if it felt uncertain. And that's when I knew. I couldn't keep letting my past dictate what I did next. I had to take a risk. I had to choose a life that meant something. And that meant using this money, the money the Harringtons had so generously offered, not to buy something for myself, but to help others. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrington. "John, I'm glad you called," he said, his voice smooth but full of that underlying intensity that always seemed to command attention. "Have you had some time to think?" "I have," I said, taking a deep breath. "I've thought a lot about what this means, what I could do with this money. I've made my decision." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him leaning forward, waiting for me to continue. "I'm not going to use this money for myself," I said, my voice steady. "I've thought long and hard, and what I want to do is create something that helps the people who've been struggling like I have. I want to set up a fund for people who've suffered injuries on the job. It's not just firefighters, but anyone, construction workers, factory workers, people who work hard every day and don't have the resources to recover when things go wrong." There was a silence on the other end of the phone, and for a moment I thought I had said something wrong. But then Mr. Harrington's voice came through, calm and approving. "That's a remarkable decision, John, and it's exactly what we were hoping you would do with this. You've earned this money, and I'm glad to see you plan to use it for something bigger than yourself." I couldn't stop the smile that spread across my face. It wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about giving people the kind of support they never had a chance to recover, to rebuild. In that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. Within the next few weeks, I worked closely with lawyers and financial advisors to set up the Miller Foundation. It would help injured workers, those who were left behind by the system, the ones whose injuries kept them from working but didn't qualify for any real help. I named it after my mother, Carol, because without her strength, without her tireless work ethic, I wouldn't have learned what it meant to give, without expecting anything in return. I spent time in the community, meeting with people who could benefit from the foundation, hearing their stories, their struggles. There was one woman, Karen, who had worked as a waitress for 20 years before she slipped and broke her leg, leaving her unable to work for months. She didn't have insurance, couldn't get workers' comp, and was barely scraping by on disability. I remember her eyes when I handed her the first check from the foundation tears, welling up as she told me she hadn't had the money to buy food for her kids that week. That moment, those few seconds when Karen's gratitude and relief were as raw and real as anything I'd ever felt, made me realize how much work I had to do. This wasn't going to be easy, but this was my purpose now. I didn't just want to be the guy who saved Emma. I wanted to be the guy who saved everyone I could. And that meant doing the hard work, not for the fame, not for the reward, but for the simple act of making the world a little bit better. As the foundation began to grow, so did my sense of purpose. I felt more fulfilled than I had in years. I still visited Lily, of course, and we'd talk for hours about what the future might look like. Sometimes she'd bring up her dreams of starting her own business, of helping people in her own way. I could see it in her eyes, the same fire that had driven me to become a firefighter, to save lives. She had that same spark, that same desire to make a difference. But as much as my life was changing, there was still one thing that hung over me: my family. The calls came in slowly, and I avoided them at first. But eventually my mother left a message. She said she wanted to talk. I didn't know if I was ready for that, but I knew I had to face her. I owed her that much, if only to show her that I had found my own way, even if it wasn't the way she had wanted. I called her back the next morning. "John, I'm glad you picked up." Her voice sounded softer than I expected. "I know we haven't been close, but I've been hearing things about what you've been doing, about the foundation." I stayed quiet, listening. "I'm proud of you, son," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm sorry I never showed it. I know I should have been there for you more." I was speechless. For the first time in my life, my mother was proud of me. "I don't expect anything, Mom. I just want you to know that I'm doing okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm doing this for me, for the people who need it." She didn't say much after that. But that one conversation, those simple words were enough. I had found peace. Not from the money, not from the recognition, but from knowing that I was doing something with my life that mattered. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. There were still going to be challenges, still going to be moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. And as I sat there, thinking about how far I had come, I realized something. Life doesn't give you second chances. It gives you moments. Moments to change, to choose, to make a difference. And it's what you do with those moments that determines who you really are. So here's the question. One last time, what would you do with your moment? Would you take the money and run, or would you make it count? Not just for yourself, but for everyone who needs it. I'm ready to hear your thoughts. Tell me, what would you do? It was strange how quickly things started to feel normal again. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living with intention. The Miller Foundation was gaining traction, and as word spread about the work we were doing, I started to see the ripple effects in the community. People who'd been ignored by the system were finally getting the help they needed, and I realized just how far-reaching one simple decision could be. But just as I began to feel like I was finding my place in this new life, something happened that caught me off guard. A letter arrived at my office. It was from the town council. At first I thought it was just another piece of paperwork, a formality, maybe even a thank you note from some of the families whose lives the foundation had touched. But when I opened it, my heart skipped a beat. The letter was an invitation. They were holding a public ceremony to honor the first responders of the Lincoln High Fire, and they wanted me to speak. Sat there, staring at the letter for a long time. Honor me, the guy who was just doing his job, the guy who didn't want to be anyone's hero. It felt overwhelming. And yet, I knew that this wasn't about me. It wasn't about the fire, or about the money, or about how many lives I'd saved. It was about the community finally seeing beyond the labels they'd placed on me. It was about recognizing the hard work of everyone who'd been there, that day, the firehouse, the medics, the volunteers, the teachers, the families. It was about all of us, so I agreed. The ceremony was held at the old community hall in the center of Aspen Falls. It was a beautiful evening, with the last of the autumn leaves swirling around in the cool breeze, and the air smelling of pine and wood smoke. The hall was filled with townspeople, some familiar faces, others I'd never seen before. There was an energy in the air, a sense of pride that made my heart swell. Lily was sitting with the crowd, her smile encouraging as she waved at me from the back of the room. I took a deep breath and walked to the stage, my heart thudding in my chest. When I took the mic, I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. I had no script, no notes, just the raw emotions that had been building inside me for so long. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady, but full of something else. "Thank you for the honor of being here tonight. But I want to make one thing clear. I wasn't the hero that day. We were all heroes. Every single person in this room, the firefighters, the teachers, the medics, the parents, who stayed calm and helped guide their children to safety. We all did our part. The crowd was quiet, listening. I could see them nodding, understanding what I was trying to say. The truth is, I continued, the fire didn't just test my strength. It tested our community. It tested our willingness to come together in the face of fear. And that's what makes this place special. Aspen Falls isn't just a town. It's a family. I paused for a moment, looking out over the crowd. My eyes landed on Lily, and something inside me softened. She was right. I was changing things. But the truth was, I was no longer afraid of change. I've spent a lot of my life running from the past, trying to escape what I thought was holding me back, I said, my voice growing stronger. But I've learned that the past doesn't define you. Your actions, your choices, they do. What we do with the opportunities we're given. That's what really matters. The crowd was silent, but I could feel their energy, their collective heartbeat matching mine. They were with me. The reason I'm standing here tonight is because of all of you, because we're a community. And when one of us falls, we pick each other up. And that's what makes us stronger than anything else. I stepped away from the microphone, feeling a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't just the speech, it was the fact that I was finally at peace with who I was, with the choices I'd made. As I left the stage, a wave of applause broke out, and I realized something. I wasn't just receiving recognition for the fire. I was receiving recognition for what I had become, a person who had taken a chance, who had made something of himself despite the odds. After the ceremony, I made my way through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging thanks. But I kept my eyes on Lily. She was waiting for me near the door, her face lighting up when she saw me approach. "You were incredible," she said, her voice warm. "I knew you had it in you." I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth in my chest. "I'm just a guy who's trying to do something good." She shook her head, taking my hand. "You're a lot more than that, John. You're making a real difference here. Don't ever forget that." And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just making a difference for other people, I was making a difference for myself. I had found my purpose. It wasn't about the fire, the money, or the accolades. It was about the impact I was making, the lives I was touching, and the sense of fulfillment I felt when I knew I was living with integrity. Later that night, as I walked Lily home, I felt like I was finally starting to understand what all of this meant. The fire, the money, the foundation, it had all been leading me to this point, to this understanding that what I did with my life mattered, not for the recognition, not for the fame, but for the good I could bring to the world. I stopped in front of her house, looking at her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you," I said softly, "for everything, for helping me see who I could really be." She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "You were always capable of this, John. You just needed to believe in yourself." I leaned in, kissed her on the cheek, and as I walked back to my cabin, I realized that this journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the future. There were still so many things I had to do, so many people I wanted to help. But I knew one thing for sure. I had found my purpose. I wasn't afraid anymore. But here's the real question. How many of us are really willing to step into the unknown? To take that chance and make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us? Think about it. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you take the leap, even when it feels uncertain? Or would you hold back, afraid of the change it could bring? Let me know what you think. The days after the ceremony were a blur of activity. The foundation was growing, and with every passing week, more people were reaching out for help. It felt like my life had finally found a rhythm, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. And yet, as things started to settle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at a crossroads again. The foundation was flourishing, but there were still parts of me, parts of my past that I hadn't fully confronted. The phone calls from my family had continued, though I'd ignored them. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the people who had never really believed in me. The ones who, despite the money, despite the recognition, were still out there, living their lives as if nothing had changed. But that was something I needed to confront, wasn't it? The question of whether the foundation this new life I was building was enough to fill the void, or if I still needed to find closure with the people who had shaped me. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, going over paperwork for the next round of foundation grants, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. The tone was different this time, less cold, more genuine. "John, I've been thinking. I know I haven't been the best mom to you, and I've made a lot of mistakes, but I want to try. If you're willing, I'd love to talk. Please call me when you can. I love you. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. For the first time in a long time, my chest tightened, not out of anger, but out of something else. Hope. It had been years since I'd heard those words from her. Years since we'd shared a moment that didn't feel like a cold obligation or a regret. I had spent so much time thinking about how I was going to move on from my family, how I was going to build a life for myself. But here they were, still a part of me, still lingering at the edges of my heart. I wasn't sure I was ready for this. But I knew that if I didn't confront it now, I would be carrying it with me forever. I called her. When she answered, there was a brief, uncomfortable silence on the other end, and then she spoke. "John, is that really you?" It was hard to recognize her voice after all this time. But when I heard her say my name, it felt like a flood of memories washed over me. The good ones, the bad ones, everything in between. "It's me, Mom," I said quietly. "I got your message." I wasn't sure you'd call," she said, her voice shaking. I've been thinking about you a lot, about everything we never talked about. I didn't know what to say to that. There was so much that had gone unsaid between us, too much to untangle in a single conversation. But I wanted to listen. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I just wanted to understand. "Mom," I said, my voice steady but calm. "I've been doing a lot of thinking too. A lot has happened since everything, since the fire and the foundation. I've changed, you know. I'm not the same person I was when I left." "I know," she said, her voice full of sorrow. "I know, and I'm proud of you. I just wish I had done better by you, John. I didn't know how to be a good mom. Not really. I never really saw you the way I should have." There was the words I never thought I'd hear from her. They hit harder than I could have ever expected. It wasn't the apology I had wanted, but maybe it was the one I needed. "You did the best you could, Mom," I said, my throat tight. But sometimes that wasn't enough. I've had to learn to live with that, to learn to be who I am, even if it wasn't what you expected. There was a long pause. I could almost hear her holding her breath. "I'm sorry," she said again. This time, the words coming with a raw honesty that I had never expected. "I know I wasn't there for you, but I want to try. I want to be a part of your life, John, even if it's late." It was then that I realized something that had taken me years to understand. This wasn't about forgiveness. Not really. It was about letting go of the expectations, the disappointments, and the regrets that had followed me for so long. It was about accepting that our relationships, like everything else, had to evolve. And if I wanted to move forward, if I wanted to be truly free, I had to accept her for who she was, flaws and all. "I'm willing to try too, Mom," I said, my voice breaking a little. "But we have to start slow. I've built a life for myself, and it's not perfect, but it's mine. I want you to be a part of it, but we can't go backward. We can only move forward." There was a long pause, and then I heard her sniffle. "I understand, John. I'm just glad you're willing to talk to me. I know it's going to take time, but I'm here." "I know," I said, feeling something heavy in my chest finally start to lift. "And I'm here too." We didn't talk much longer that day, but that conversation marked a turning point for me. I realized that there was still a lot of healing to do, not just for me, but for my family, for my mom, and maybe, just maybe, for Logan too. I still hadn't heard from him since the fire. He'd sent a few texts, a few shallow attempts to reconnect, but nothing that really felt like an apology. But after everything with my mom, I knew that if I didn't make the effort now, I'd regret it. That night, I texted him. "Hey Logan, it's John. I've been thinking about you. When you're ready, I'm here. I'd like to talk." I didn't know if he'd respond or if he'd even be ready to have that conversation, but I knew it was the right thing to do. For him, for me, for all the things we'd never said. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and paperwork. The foundation was keeping me busy and I loved every minute of it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Maybe I had forgiven myself, but I hadn't forgiven my family. Not completely. And as much as I had tried to move on, that loose thread still tugged at my heart. Then, one evening, just as I was heading home from a meeting, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. "John," the voice on the other end said. It was low, hesitant, but I knew who it was. It was Logan. I I don't know how to say this, he started, his voice shaky, but I'm sorry. I've been an idiot. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to try. I don't want to keep running away from the family. I held my breath, feeling something stir inside me. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the conversation I had been waiting for. I'm here, Logan, I said, my voice steady, and I'm not going anywhere. We've got a lot to talk about. And for the first time, I felt like the weight that had been pressing on me for so long was finally starting to lift. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There were still scars to heal, still conversations to have, still wounds to mend. But I had made it this far. I had found a new purpose, a new path. And now, it was time to walk it not alone, but with the people who mattered. So, here's my question for you. How do we move forward when the past is still holding us back? Can we truly change, or are we just running from who we used to be? Let me know what you think.